Thank you, Robert, for that beautiful gathering music. Friends, my name is Pastor Jeff, and I am privileged to serve as one of the pastors here at Dayspring United Methodist Church. And I've gotten to know and love Betty over these past 9 years, during which time I've served here. So I, like many of you, am grieving, but I'm also here today with all of you to celebrate an amazing life. She left such an impact on our world. As Studs Terkel says, the great oral historian, he says the meaning of life is to make a dent. And she made a dent in our world. She left an indelible impression on all of us. Friends, the Apostle Paul wrote, "Whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue and if there be any praise, think on these things: truth, beauty, justice, goodness." So friends, we gather today to follow Paul's advice as we witness to and celebrate the life of Betty Davidson. We come together in grief, acknowledging our human loss, but we also come together in gratitude to celebrate a life lived with creativity, generosity, and love. It is good to come together in times like these because we need each other for comfort and consolation, in empathy and courage and wisdom to help navigate this new reality in our lives with support and love for one another. And it's also in times like this how we're reminded how precious, how fleeting, how fragile life is. So we mustn't take a single day for granted. We acknowledge that in birth and in life, even in death, our lives embody glimpses of the sacred. And the life that Betty lived in all its uniqueness has now passed into memory. So we gather this day uplifting her gifts and graces, the presence that she brought to each of her relationships, and to see how within our own lives Betty travels with us into the future. So may God grant us grace that in pain we may find comfort, in sorrow hope, and in death the promise of new life. Will you stand and join with me in the singing of one of Betty's favorite hymns, "My Life Flows On"? Please be seated. Let's pray. Spirit of life, who brought us to birth, you are ever more ready to hear than we are to pray. You know our needs before we ask and our ignorance in asking. Give to us now your grace, that as we shrink before the mystery of death, we may see the light of eternity. Speak to us once more the solemn message of life and of death. And remind us that every human life, with a mind to think and a heart to love, is an expression of your Spirit, O God. Help each of us to live without fear, so when our days here are accomplished, it can be said that we lived life to its fullest, even to our last days, so that in living or dying we may be enveloped in grace and affirm with the Apostle Paul that nothing in life or in death will be able to separate us from your love, O God. Amen. Most of you know that Betty was a longtime member of the Dayspring Chorale, over 35 years. And they are here this morning in force to pay tribute with one of her favorite anthems.
Is
present and former members of the Dayspring Chorale for being here to honor Betty. Under the direction of David Schildkret, who is the Director of Music Ministries here at Dayspring and also recently retired from the faculty at ASU after 20 plus years, 21 years. And Robert Mills, who is our accompanist here at Dayspring, and he's also at ASU. So it's fitting as we celebrate Betty's life that there are so many sun devils in our midst. Friends, literally for thousands of years, the words that we are about to recite together have been used at times such as this for consolation and comfort and strength. The words that many of us have written on our hearts, and if you don't, they will also be projected. So will you join me in reciting the words of the 23rd Psalm? The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me to lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside the still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in the paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me. Thou preparest a table before me in the presence of mine enemies. Thou anointest my head with oil, my cup runneth over. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. And here, too, these words of hope from the Christian scripture, selections from John's Gospel, the 14th chapter. Jesus said, "Do not let your hearts be troubled. Believe in God. Believe also in me. In my Father's house there are many dwelling places. If it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? And if I go and prepare a place for you, I will come again and take you to myself, so that where I am, you may be also. And you know the way to the place where I am going. Peace I leave with you. My peace I give to you. I do not give to you as the world gives. Do not let your hearts be troubled, and do not let them be afraid."
For the
I'm not sure it gets any better than John Rutter's arrangement of Forth the Beauty of the Earth. Thank you, choir. Joe, Scott, Michelle, and little Joe, we are all here to surround you and your family with love and support. And it's going to spill over from this service into the fellowship hall if you're able to stay and express your love to the family. If you didn't get a copy of Betty's obituary when you came in, it's on a table as you leave. I'm tempted to read it. It was so beautifully done. And it paints a rich portrait of her life, which was so full. But I won't read it. I'll just share a few reflections, mostly from conversations with her husband of 55 years. But before that, just a quick observation. A young family started coming to Dayspring about 5 years ago, Anthony and Tanya. Tanya is a geneticist who had washed her hands of organized religion, feeling that the church was anti-science and really had lost faith in Christianity and what it might have to offer the world, its relevance for our world today. And we have a monument digital sign out, and occasionally in the rotation, especially as we approach February 12th, Charles Darwin's birthday, we have a sign out that says, "Thank God for evolution." And it was that sign that brought Tanya back to church after many years. And Betty so appreciated when we would celebrate evolution and science, that faith and science are not antagonistic, but dancing partners, informing each other, setting about to answer different sets of questions. And whenever I would bring science into my sermon, especially when I might mention an insect like Mary Oliver's grasshopper, say, invariably Betty would come up to me in the narthex after the service and tell me about her love of the natural world in general and insects in particular. Indeed, one of the last conversations I had with her, NPR had just aired a story on the wonder of dragonflies. These hundreds of millions of years old creatures that have 4 wings that operate independently of each other. And engineers are trying to replicate that because it would be like a drone just turning on a dime. And I think they're already doing that. She was such a marvel to engage in conversation, her mind, and of course her childlike curiosity. I love the fact that she was a scientist and a person of faith. She was a graduate of Mount Union College, which was founded by the Methodist Church, and she got her degree in biology. There it is, right there together. The Methodist Church and the natural sciences. It speaks volumes. Betty was born on November 25th, 1942. Her early years growing up were in Damascus, Ohio. Though she wasn't born there, she was born down the road in Salem, which had the closest hospital. She grew up on her dad's farm, 20 acres of strawberries. I mean, can you imagine? And she grew up picking those strawberries. Those strawberries, she said, put her through college. She was an only child, but had 5 cousins nearby to play with and to enjoy the outdoors with. Dad loved to fish, and they would return each year to a favorite lake in Canada, where she didn't so much fish as collect specimens, insects, bugs. She met Joe in 65, 66 at Ohio State, where he was finishing his PhD in mechanical engineering and she in biology and entomology. She loved to help people in everything she did. She really enjoyed riding horses. That was one of her passions. And she loved music. They joined Christ Chapel before it became Dayspring. Before we moved to this location, the church was up on Southern and Mill, I think, and it was called Christ Chapel. And Betty was part of the music program that Michael Kelly started all those years ago and was one of the first members of the chorale. She was a member of the Society of Invertebrate Pathology, and there are a few professors here that can explain to you what that is following the service. But I did learn she was especially concerned around diseases of honeybees in particular. And we have learned in recent years just how important bees are for everything, not just for we human beings, but for all of life on planet Earth. Betty really wanted to see and experience other places and cultures. She was the first in her family to travel to Europe, South America, China, Singapore, Prague. When it was behind the Iron Curtain in the 80s, she also liked to sew. She would make clothes for little Scott then, and herself and Joe while Scott was growing up. So much to share, and Joe's going to fill in some of the gaps, and then I'll actually bring the mic out. So if you have a word or a brief story you'd like to relate. There's somebody else who's been on my mind of late. He died just a week or two ago. You may have seen his obituary in the New York Times. Rabbi Harold Kushner. He had such an impact on Jews and Christians especially, but I think most folks would appreciate his wisdom. He's best known, of course, for his book, When Bad Things Happen to Good People. You may have heard of that book. When he set out to write that book, he was going to title it, Why Do Bad Things Happen to Good People? But then he realized that he didn't know any better than anybody else. He had lost a son, Aaron, to progeria, which is a rare, rapid aging disease. Little Aaron, when he was born, he wasn't gaining much weight, and the doctors ran all kinds of tests. And when he was about 2, they diagnosed him with this condition. And the doctors explained to Rabbi Kushner and his wife that Aaron probably wouldn't grow beyond 3 feet, 3.5 feet in height. He wouldn't have any hair, and he would die of old age around 14 or 15. Again, a rapid aging, just a tragic condition. And so the rabbi set out to write a book to try to explain why there's so much suffering and pain in the world, how to make sense of that in light of our faith. And as I say, he wasn't able to explain so much as comfort. Indeed, he wrote another book called The Wisdom of the 23rd Psalm, which we just recited. And he says the 23rd Psalm is like a 3-act play, right? The first act, the psalmist is celebrating God's presence and God's providence, taking care with green pastures and water, etc. And then difficulty comes, as it does in our lives. It may happen to a 2-year-old or a 14-year-old or to an 80-year-old. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. So that's the second act of the play. And then the third act finds some resolution in recognizing that, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, thou art with me. I'm not alone. God is with me through it all. God is there to comfort and not to explain, to be there when bad things happen, even though we don't always know why. We don't know why Betty fell into dementia and this brilliant mind deteriorated. We can't explain it. But she was still Betty. And Joe shares how she still knew him and family and was able to express love and gratitude. So we give thanks for a life well lived. And as people of faith, we're grateful that despite what life sometimes throws at us, God is with us. Joe, I know you want to share a few words.
Thank you. But first, let me thank the choir and David and Robert and certainly Jeff for participating. It turns out that this particular arrangement and form of remembrance is something that Betty established herself. 11 years ago, the piece of paper says, while my mind is in good shape, something of that sort, this is what I want. So I sent a copy of that to David and I said, what can you do with this? And here we are. So, the good mind bit, as you know, or some of you know anyway, Betty suffered from dementia over the last several years. It had progressed to the point that she had been residing in an assisted living home since January 1st, after she recovered from a mild bout of COVID in December. I was visiting her 2 to 3 times a week for lunch, and I feel very fortunate to have had a very good conversation with her and a short walk around the neighborhood with her before she died. She recognized me and our immediate family, but she had forgotten a lot of colleagues and former students, and even more of the bugs. When we were dating in 1966-67, Betty made it clear that she did not want to be a housebound wife. She wanted to have independence, to pursue her career and interests in entomology. I, as an active mountain climber, who had seen a climbing companion take several unnecessary risks just to get back by an agreed-to dinner-time hour with his family, this looked like an opportunity for us both. I later learned that her father had advised her, marry someone who travels, not someone who talks about traveling. And she really did want to experience other places and cultures, and as Jeff mentioned, she was first in our family to go to lots of places around the world. We were a good team, she and I, traveling in Europe. She spoke French, and I could get by in German. We usually would not book any accommodation, only a car, then drive into an area of the map that had a low density of roads and a good prospect for hill walking. Once driving into the mountains east of Grenoble in France with Scott, we arrived at a farm in a small valley with hills all around. The small sign at the front said they had accommodation for travelers, but no one answered the door. So we drove to the tourist office in the nearest town and got a booking in a nearby hotel. It was 3 stories high when we got there and located in a flat residential neighborhood. No shops, nothing interesting around at all. Then we remembered that there was a car parked next to the farmhouse. It was a beautiful summer day. So we wondered, could the lady of the house be asleep in the back garden? So before entering the hotel, we decided to try the farmhouse once more. Again, no one answered the door, but this time we walked around back and looked over the low fence in the back garden. Sure enough, there was Madame, sound asleep on a chaise lounge under a big tree. Madame, excusez-moi, Madame. She awoke and came to the fence. Betty asked her if she had a place, a chambre, for us to stay for 3 or 4 nights. She looked us up and down and then said, come. She took us to a room in the attic of the house that was perfect for the 3 of us. This was a full board establishment with meals served family style on the ground floor above the barn in the basement. Madame called the hotel and canceled our reservation. And although we were the only English speakers in the place, we had a delightful several days there. One day, while walking a trail high above the valley, we passed the German couple who were staying in the other attic room of the farmhouse. Everyone was surprised. I think Betty and I both have had terrific lives. She gave me a wonderful 55 years. She got to do so many of the things that she wanted to do. Not everything, of course. Near the end of her undergraduate studies, her wish to become a veterinarian was dashed because she couldn't find any good school with openings for women students. But she accomplished so much and fulfilled so many of her dreams, including leaving behind what we feel is fantastic next generation. So, fulfilling dreams, what more can one ask from life than that?
Joe, thank you. And now, Betty and Joe's son, Scott.
All right, I thought I'd sing a little bit of Amazing Grace. It's something I've sung to Joseph every day since he was born. So. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now am found. Was blind, but now I see. I'm going to need my glasses now. Hang on a sec. All right, so sometimes you don't realize how special your parents are till you're an adult. My mom was an amazing lady. I hope I'm being as great an example to my son Joe as my mom was for me. My parents both loved to travel and see new places. One of the things I loved best about traveling the world was that we met people from all different backgrounds and cultures. Living near and visiting ASU regularly also exposed me to colleagues of my parents from many different races and cultures. This engendered a respect for people who are different than I am. I found this to be an invaluable thing living in the little town of Payson, where diversity is not as great, and it's easy to think in terms of them and us. My mom always found great pleasure in having a wide diversity of people as friends and colleagues. She taught me to look past a person's job, their color, their accent, and see the character of that person. This has been passed on again to my son. My mom and dad also instilled me a love of the outdoors. I remember traveling with my mom to Nayscoot Lake in Canada. This is where Betty grew up fishing with my grandfather and where she taught me to fish. Later, we fished in many places, including Wyoming and Montana. I remember trying to catch fly fish on a little Montana creeks without too much luck. My mom got frustrated and started catching real flies and hooking them. She also taught me about one of the best trout baits, grasshoppers. Fishing with an entomologist is always an adventure. I guess this is how she got started, observing the insects around lakes that my grandfather West was fishing. That interest in entomology has also passed on to Joseph. This curiosity in observing the world around her continued into her adulthood. I remember people watching with Mom in airports and train stations around the world. She used to say she could pick out the Americans in an international crowd with a pretty high degree of certainty. This has helped me to be more aware of human behavior and to watch for clues of danger or suspicious activity when in strange places or when observing students in my own classroom. I can usually tell if something isn't right. Mom was always more interested in the people than the science. While an accomplished scientist with a lot of papers, numerous talks, and a couple of books, she never stopped caring about the people she worked with. A great example of this is the grad student whose major professor left on vacation and nobody was there to help guide his dissertation. My mom stepped in and helped him out by having him do his research in her lab and editing his work. He, by the way, ended up getting his MD, PhD, and went on to be a doctor of children's oncology. Mom had a number of accomplished young people who worked in her lab. She helped everyone, whether they were having family trouble, or aspiring high school students, or postdoctoral students. All of them have been touched by her kindness. I don't think she ever turned anyone away. She referred to them as her Nobel Prize. Heck, even in retirement, Mom volunteered at the local elementary school to help tutor students. She's a large part of the reason I went into teaching. And finally, as many as you know, my mom loved to sing. She loved the camaraderie of the church choir and the blending of voices to make beautiful music. She enjoyed traveling to Europe and often commented on how she loved the sound of music sung in ancient churches and to cathedrals. And this love of music was passed down to me too. So I just wanted you all to know how blessed I've been to have a mother like Betty. She's a great role model, a wonderful mother. Her love and care for me and my dad has percolated down to the way I treat my own family. I remember a sign hanging in my parents' kitchen that said, "Our house is clean enough to be healthy and dirty enough to be happy."
Thank you, Scott. I'm wondering if there's anybody who would like to share. I'm going to head over to the choir here momentarily, but let me bring the mic out to you. Tell us who you are and a good word.
Thank you. My name is Sue Henderson. I'm a former member here, and I sat next to Betty in choir for many, many years. I'm married to Mark Henderson, and our first day at ASU, it was Joe who showed us campus and walked us around, took us to lunch, and Ben took us to dinner at his house where we met Betty. Betty and I had one fight that lasted 40 years, and it's still not solved, so I thought this was a chance to get the last word in. And the fight was about you, Scott. One thing that Betty and I shared was the struggles of having a profession while trying to be a good parent. And it was less done in those days than it is now. And in those days, it was meant to be a choice. You had to be a parent or have a professorship or be a teacher or have a career. You couldn't do both. And Betty was determined she could. And that's why you were here so often, Scott, at church, at choir, at youth group. And the youth program put on a play once called Colby. And the star of Colby was Scott Davidson. And the other star of the show was our oldest, Aaron Henderson. And standing right there, center stage, with this congregation quite full of people, Scott and Aaron got into a fight over who was going to hold the microphone. And they punched, and they punched. You were about 8, and punched. And then somehow middle fingers came out in the church. Both of them at each other. Betty and I continued for 40 years, sitting together in choir, trying to argue about whose finger went up first. So, to be solved perhaps in the future, or perhaps, young Joe, you would solve that for us. But Betty proved you could do things people thought women couldn't do then. She proved she could be a professional, a successful one, a member of a church, a wife and a mother, and a lover of all of us all at once. And that's what I miss about her most. I was also Scott's professor for 1 semester before he went to NAU.
Thank you so much. Fantastic. Others? Maybe you'd like to fill in a gap, something that's been left unsaid. Yes.
Hi, my name's Amber. I'm a former student of Scott's, and I remember one time he brought a group of us, there was like 6 or so of us, down, and Betty showed us the school, she showed us the entomology department, we went to the veterinary area where they kept the live animals, and I was just so happy that she was here to show us that, because there's not enough women who are interested in science anymore, and she just wanted to share that with everyone. And I'm very glad for her to bring Scott into my life, to bring her into my life. So the world's missing her now.
Others? All right, I'm coming for the choir. Because I have at least one plant over here. Ken Brooks at our men's breakfast this morning was telling me some great stories. So I said, I hope you're going to be at the service.
I am at the service. I'm Ken Brooks, and I had the privilege of singing with Betty during the time that I was part of this chorale. We've already heard that she loved to sing, she loved to share with this choir, but she enjoyed not only the music and the camaraderie, she enjoyed sharing science with singers, and she enjoyed sharing humor with people. She came to choir one night and said, I have a new book that I have written. This is a children's book called Cheery the Leopard Frog, a story for children, beautifully illustrated, telling how the Arizona Chiricahua leopard frog is an endangered species and helping to explain the science of evolution and climate change and the challenge of that. And it was a lovely story. She also liked to wear her favorite entomology t-shirt to choir at times. One of her favorite cartoonists was another biologist named Gary Larson, who drew the Far Side cartoons. And Gary probably got himself in trouble before he ever graduated drawing cartoons instead of lab notes in his notebook. He had a cartoon of a mosquito sitting on somebody's arm, and there were 2 mosquitoes right beside it. And this mosquito had landed for a mosquito bite and was filling up, and it was about to explode. And the other 2 mosquitoes say, "Pull out, Betty, pull out. You hit an artery."
Gary Larson wrote that just for Betty Davidson. I love it. Ev Taylor.
Betty and Jackie and I came with the mortgage from Christ Chapel to the choir, and we were members together. You're in her seat, Angela. It was her seat. It was her seat. You didn't mess with that. Everything, I experienced all the things that folks are talking about. There's 2 stories. One, she brought her love of bugs into the choir. There was a big black bug one night. I don't know what it was, a bumblebee or a moth, or it was huge. And we were all trying to kill it until Betty saw what we were doing. And she made sure we directed outside and it was okay. And she was angry with us. Betty was not, you're told what to do a lot when you sing. You follow the music, you follow the director. She didn't like being told what to do, though. In terms of the other parts, when do we stand? Do we sit for the organ at the end? It just did not like that at all. And that was a part of the character that I so much appreciated. She had no lack of self-confidence. She loved everybody here. She loved singing. Late in her disease process, a year ago or so, she shows up to a choir rehearsal. And we're all, it's a very welcoming group. You know, there's no exclusion. But we were trying to figure out how to deal with it because we were all worried about masks at that time. Remember, David? And it was kind of a rule if you're going to sing here, because people in other choirs had died early in that from not masking. And she didn't want to wear a mask. You didn't tell Betty what to do. Am I right, family? I mean, you know, you just, and she kept pulling it down. Well, I assigned myself as an old-time colleague to sit next to her and to talk to her. Betty, you got to put that on. I'm not putting it on. Betty, please put it on. I'm not going to put it on. Betty, she said, you put it on. I said, I have mine on. We got through it. Her love of the choir showed through that period also. She wanted to be here.
Thank you, Ev. Anybody else? Katie.
I have sworn that when I die and have a funeral, nobody is ever allowed to pass the mic. But I am such a huge fan of Betty Davidson and always was, but when things would get boring in choir, we might discuss things that we weren't supposed to be discussing. And she was giving me one of her typical lectures about the joys of bugs. And I said, okay, tell me what is so beautiful about a cockroach? And she said, if we didn't have cockroaches, you would be up to your butt in poop. Like, oh, okay, didn't think that was coming. And then another time I said, Betty, would you explain to me the beauty of the white fly? Said, those things are just making my children miserable at the bus stop. They're killing the cotton. She goes, oh no, I'm on a team that's eradicating those sons of bitches.
Oh, and Katie, we are so passing the mic. Now, I probably won't be here in 35 years for your memorial service, but anybody else? Oh, my gosh. Now, do we have anybody with second thoughts over here? And I know that Betty was instrumental in developing an organic pesticide for mosquitoes. Is that right? Yeah. But I bet she'd be the first to say also that mosquitoes help make the world go round. We just don't want them in certain areas. But salmon, for instance, like mosquitoes. got turned off, so that must be a message. Anybody else? All right, friends. Prayer. God of us all, your love never ends. When all else fails, you still are God. We pray to you for one another in our need, for all anywhere who mourn with us this day. To those who doubt, give light. To those who are weak, strength. To all who have sinned, mercy. To all who sorrow, your peace. Keep true in us the love with which we hold one another, and help us even now to trust you in all our ways. All that you have given us, O God, is yours. And as first you gave Betty to us, now we give her back to you. Receive Betty into the arms of your mercy. Raise her up with all your people. Receive us also into new life. Help us so to love and serve you in this world that we may enter into your joy even in the here and now. We are grateful for all the blessings in our lives to this day, for the gift of joy in days of health and strength, for the gift of your Spirit's abiding presence in days of pain and grief. We praise you for home and friends and for all who have faithfully lived and died. And for those of us who are Christians, we give thanks for Jesus, who showed us a life of integrity and hope, who knew our griefs, who died our death, and rose to new life. And so if you'd like to join, we pray together the prayer he taught his first disciples, saying, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. Please stand as you are able, and let's join together in singing How Great Thou Art. be seated. When Ken mentioned her children's book, which I have not seen, but I want to read that, Joe. If it's out of print, maybe I could borrow a copy. But when he mentioned that, I remembered a story that Robin Wall Kimmerer shares in her book, Weaving Sweetgrass, Indigenous Wisdom, Scientific Knowledge, and the Teachings of Plants. So that's the title of her book. She is a Native American woman who has a PhD in botany. And she tells the story of a preeminent botanist who was visiting a jungle and had as a guide an indigenous member of a local tribe who was pointing out and naming all the plants. And this preeminent botanist was just astonished at this guide's knowledge and understanding of their surroundings. And he said as much. I can't believe you know the names of everything around us. But the guide said, oh, I know. I know their names, but I don't know their songs. Betty not only knew the names, but she sang the songs of Cheery the leopard frog and so many of the insects she studied, to say nothing of singing the songs with the Dayspring Chorale. Music informed her life, and we give thanks for her eyes, for her observation, her keen observation, in helping us better understand our world and helping create a better world for all. So friends, go in peace. Again, you're welcome to join us in the fellowship hall to share stories and enjoy some refreshments and to give these very special people a big hug. Go in peace.